Welcome, everyone, to In the Hot Seat. For our repeat viewers, thank you for joining us again. For those new to the show, every 2 weeks we put industry experts and customers into the hot seat for a lively discussion, spirited debates, and some thought-provoking insights as we humanize the digital experience. All aspects of the customer lifecycle are up for discussion, as well as the technologies used throughout each phase of the journey. This is season 2 of In the Hot Seat, and this episode is our 4th in our go-to-market series that dives into channel strategy and go-to-market from that point of view. Hello, Jody.
2 topics near and dear to my heart, combining channel and GTM. You know I had to join you on this one, so I'm so excited about today.
Well, so am I, and I thought we would start with this little slide, which I gathered in discussing with a super large technology company and how they looked at their channel strategy for the next year and what they were trying to achieve. And I put this as sort of a stake in the ground because I know that this channel space has changed so dramatically over the last 2 or 3 years, but I just want to sort of ground everybody in how one of the biggest companies in the world was thinking about channel strategy and what their priorities were, how they defined their challenges, and then we can sort of riff from there. So there were a number of things. I'll just sort of go into each one of them briefly. The one was the sort of preference, meaning, if I'm selling through channels, then I'm counting on people who also sell my competitors' technology to prefer to sell mine. And so what are the strategies that we can put in place, tactics to make us easier to sell, more rewarding to sell, et cetera, right? And that sort of is tied to this idea of mindset. Are they aware of us, or are they thinking about one of our competitors as the first thing that comes to mind when they think about creating a solution for their customers? Another one that they were concerned about, and this was 3 or 4 years ago, and complexity has just gone through the roof since then, is how do we help these guys sell? Even this company has over 100 products in its portfolio. Just the complexity of their direct sales people needing to sell this technology is beyond what human beings can do. And when you look at a reseller, they've got multiple of these companies with their hundreds of products. So the complexity just goes through the roof. And, taking people to ball games and dinners is just like not the right solution to help these guys be more effective at their jobs, right? The other thing that's really difficult in sales is getting those new logos. And, it's salespeople in particular. If we've got business, we tend to spend a lot of time with our current customers and not so much time doing the much harder job of trying to reel in new customers. And so that was one of the things that they wanted to incentivize their channel to do more effectively. And then the other thing I thought was interesting was, we've had a significant increase in sort of the number of stakeholders that are part of these complex decisions, right? And typically, if you're a really good technologist, you're maybe not so good at talking to the line of business executive about their trends and so on. And so these resources that they have, whether they're direct sellers or indirect sellers, need to scale in terms of the sorts of conversations that they can have. And that's not something that you can do quickly, sort of in a human-based scenario. There's got to be some technological aspect that's added to augment the seller. And then the last point that came across really strongly was their ability to, helping their partners, help them understand their customers' needs and constraints and biases and current state and the outcomes that they're trying to achieve and the impediments they see. And again, when you have to do that in the context of lots of stakeholders, then kind of everybody involved in the decision has their own idea about what it is they're trying to accomplish, and herding those cats is a significant obstacle to overcome for the solution providers. So I thought with given your background, how do you see this has changed over the last 3 or 4 years? This seems like it's very reseller focused. Go ahead and just comment on that.
So yes, I think there is a narrow focus here on with the reseller mindset, but it does also apply when we look at that complex enterprise sale, like what we were talking about, right? Your partners in the channel are more than resellers, and I think some of these areas, which I want to dive in today when we get Jay up on the studio here, in talking through how that has changed. Because to your point, talking about the dinners before, right, and the wining and dining and what you did with partners back in the day, that has evolved drastically, especially with we were talking earlier about combining how customers know about your stuff more so than even the partners that you're training, right? And getting them to understand your product and your solution set. Like the dynamic and the complexity behind building that channel strategy and building that GTM motion with channel partners has evolved pretty quickly. And it's something that as marketers and sales, when you're talking about how you're going to grow your company, I don't think we're at the point. I think we're at the point now where channel has to be a part of the mix, right? Before you didn't necessarily, some companies could get away without having a channel strategy. And I would argue that, channel has to be part of everyone's strategy, regardless if we're talking, marketplace type channel or more complex enterprise type channel motion. So I'm really excited to talk with Jay.
Because of the difficulty in getting awareness and engagement and that sort of thing, it's not necessarily transactional.
I think, yes, I think it's a combination of, there's transactional deals and there's non-transactional deals, but it is also about the customer intent as well, right? Customers don't necessarily want to be working with multiple vendors. They do want to be able to work with someone who can pull things all together on some of those larger size deals. So I think it's also a motion that's being driven from the customer's interests and desires as well. And I think we should bring Jay in if you're good.
Let's go.
Awesome. So I'm so excited because anyone who is dealing with channels has already heard of our guest who's going in the hot seat, and he is absolutely he's going to be a great guest for this episode. He is an accomplished speaker, author, and innovator in the IT industry. He has so many awards in the channel space that I couldn't possibly even begin to list them all out. He has spent a 30-year career history in various executive roles in the channel sales, marketing, and strategy roles within companies like IBM and Lenovo, Forrester, and he is now with Canalys, where he is a chief analyst for the global channels. Without further ado, let's bring in Jay. Jay McBain, welcome.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Your bio, and I had to cut that one down. There's a lot there.
It didn't seem like it.
Wouldn't want to miss the channel conversation.
Thanks for joining us. So much to dive into. Pete, go ahead. I know.
So Jay, as I sort of stated in my initial slideware there, let's start with, historically speaking, what were technology providers trying to achieve through a channel strategy? Was it scale? What's the primary driver there?
Yeah, it was really a force multiplier for scale. And it was also an international strategy, figuring out the local customs and taxation and accounting and the systems to get into 193 countries were better done via local providers and local service providers. But channels itself, if you look backwards, 75% of all world trade flows indirectly through local third-party players. So you bought your last car from a dealer, you bought your last TV set from a retailer, you bought your last jar of peanut butter from a grocer. I could go through all of the dealerships, agencies, brokers, resellers, retailers, franchisees, gas stations, pharmacies that you use every day. And you can imagine all 27 industries are selling 75% of their revenue through third parties. In the tech industry, this year it's going to be 70.1% through channels. But today we're going to break the conversation into two things. One is the channel of distribution, where the independent third party who collects the money on behalf of a vendor makes up 70%. But on the other 26%, it's partner assisted, meaning that it might be, collected directly or in some other way through a marketplace, but the partner gets the customer to the dance, gets them on the dance floor, keeps them dancing all night long, somewhere before, during, or after the transaction, adds value to the customer. And 96% of the tech industry, 96% of $5.4 trillion this year will be partner assisted. And that's what we're here today to talk about, the go-to-market and the actions, sales, marketing, CX, product types of things that they do to help vendors.
So let me, I said earlier when, I don't know if you heard when Pete and I were bantering earlier, I believe truly that channel is a staple now, right? Before you would have, you would dissect your GTM motions and you may or may not have a channel strategy. I believe that is now commonplace, right? Everyone needs to have a channel strategy, regardless of where you are in your channel strategy. But it's a line item and it's a motion that you're building out with your executive team internally. Would you agree with that or disagree with that statement?
I'm going to partially disagree, because the word channel has a connotation to it, and it gets into a little bit of a lexicon here. Because up until 20 years ago, most of the tech industry was sold through partners. It was indirect channels. So for example, if you happen to be in the PC industry, it's 70%. If you happen to be in cybersecurity, 91.6% of it is sold through partners. There is no way to go to market without the partners that surround the customer at the point of sale. But in the last 20 years, if you look at Salesforce, for example, starting the SaaS industry, which this year will be $420 billion in size and 250,000 SaaS companies, Salesforce got to 35 billion direct. But at the same time, still found a way to recruit 223,000 partners. The answer is, well, they didn't need channels of distribution, because literally 99% of the company was sold direct. So why would a partner ever join Salesforce along on this journey? Well, every dollar of Salesforce kicks out $6.19 of opportunity for ISVs, for SIs, for MSPs, for others to provide services. And those could be consulting, design, architecture, implementation, integration, etc. So these are what the partners are doing, even though they're not collecting money. They're not a channel of distribution, but they're absolutely the alliances, the partner, the ecosystem around it. And so that led us into the hyperscalers 12 years later, AWS. And then, shortly after, Microsoft and Google figured out, even a company that's so channel driven like Microsoft figured out that only 20 to 30% of Azure was going through the channel in terms of collecting money. But Microsoft would say 96% of their deals in Azure, they're measuring as partner assisted. So we need to have kind of a two-part conversation. It's either the channel of distribution collecting the money, or it's the partnerships that surround it. McKinsey, who is advising all the Fortune 500 boards, now says that there are 7 partners on average that surround every customer. So in those, surround, it could be before the consulting design, it could be at the point of sale. They're just not collecting the money. They're configuring, pricing, quoting, provisioning, whatever it is, or after, which in a subscription consumption economy, everything's about the customer for life. They're upselling, they're cross-selling, they're enriching, they're doing the retention work that's critical to these organizations, but they're just not collecting the money. So that's the kind of the dual conversation that we're now having.
Okay, so that does bring up a very good distinction, right? When I talk about channel, I talk about, and I probably mosh it all together, right? Because to me, talking about channel strategy is not, it doesn't mean the money is flowing through person or company partner A. It means the channel is the partners who are working pre and during and post and influencing and supporting, in addition to potentially a marketplace where you're collecting dollars. So that's actually a really good point that we should probably level set for the conversation, because channel, people could be listening to this thinking my way when the discussion is actually referring to a channel in the collecting the money side of things. So thank you for clarifying that.
That's been one of the elements of confusion. When you talk to any SaaS founder in San Francisco and you bring up the word channel, what they learned in college about channels of distribution, it's like, I don't think I need that. I think I can sell direct. And by the way, I have to sell direct to get to product fit. I got to be very close to my customers in those early years. And later on, all the big companies that I'm looking up to, not just Salesforce, but ServiceNow and Workday and Marketo and HubSpot and all these NetSuites, all the big companies who have achieved this galactic, multi-billion-dollar, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in valuation are all direct companies. So if you confuse people by channels, which is short for channels of distribution, Canalys is Latin for channel. So you can imagine that we live this every day, but no company, regardless if you're in SaaS or you're in hardware, software, wherever you are, can be successful today and grow to the level you want it to grow without that surround strategy. If you've got 7 people actively creating friction in your marketing, in your selling, in your CX, in your product, kind of tech alliances and other things, that level of friction is going to hold every company back. So again, you can be 100% direct. Like a ServiceNow, for example, has 250,000 partners, and they don't rely on any channels of distribution, but they're absolutely one of the friendliest partner-driven ecosystem companies in the world. So that's kind of this conversation now that is maybe less threatening to a founder who may have learned what channels meant years ago, to just flip it over and start talking partnerships. Just kind of do a Control F and replace partner with every place you would have put channel in the conversation.
I'm going to Control F my statement then when we were bantering and say that every strategy has to have a partner motion as opposed to the channel motion. There, I just Controlled F that.
that phrase could come up handy. So what I want to talk about was sort of how has it changed over the last 3-4 years in terms of what these partners need in terms of support from the technology provider. How have we evolved from ball games and dinners to whatever it is they need now? And if you're not even doing the transaction, then it's got to be a completely different type of enablement or support that they need, right?
Yeah, it's not only in the last 3 years, it's in the last 6 months. So you can imagine we've been surveying for over 30 years, what do partners want? And usually number one is we want more leads. We want more, co-marketing. We want more enablement. We want more training and education. All the things were pretty much, the top 10 was always pretty much set in terms of what partners want. And 6 months ago, that changed pretty radically. Now, partners want to be measured and they want to be incentivized on all the parts of the cycle. When we go and talk to partners at large, and there's a Venn diagram behind me over my shoulder that shows that there are millions of partners broken into 20 different categories. But when you ask them what they want is, I provide a lot of value to the customer. And it could be before the sale, it could be at the point of sale, it could be after the point of sale. Regardless, I want the vendor to recognize that work that we do and that we delight the customer, that they keep buying from us and buying more from us. By the way, services are growing faster than products, hardware and software products now in our industry, because of this level of support that partners give. And if you do the survey, over half of all kinds of partners are charging for consulting, charging for design and architecture work. They're charging for the implementations, the integrations, the managed services. 44% of them are developing software themselves. They look like ISVs, partners that lead with software. So a partner isn't a partner anymore. The categorizations of a VAR versus a managed service provider are gone, because the average partner now checks 3.2 boxes in the business models that they perform. And the slide that you put up first is a little bit of a misnomer, because everything on the right started with we, as in the vendor. And what's changed in the last 6 to 12 months is there is no vendor first strategy to partnering. It's all customer driven. The we in the middle is now the customer. And the customer has 28 measurable, definable moments in a considered purchase. From the point they have a problem to the point they spend the money, those 28 moments are part of where partners play. At the point of sale, I've talked about, but in a subscription consumption and a micro consumption model that we're in generative AI and these new agentic AI models, it's all about every 30 days forever. Winning the customer now is really the first 30 days. The vendor you pointed to at the beginning has a major recurring model for their hardware now that they're pushing really hard, getting into this subscription consumption game that all platform economies are rolling towards. So this is kind of the measurable parts, the 28 moments into that initial sale, which is the first 30 days with the customer, to every 30 days forever. The customer sits in the middle. The vendor relies on those 7 partners on average in every deal to get them through the before, during, and after parts. And this is where sales and marketing, this is where your CX teams and your product teams all come in and recognize the power of partnerships in terms of driving revenue, driving stickiness, and having something that's reliable, repeatable, and then the force multiplier, which is scalable.
So would you say that, so to me, listening to you, it sounds like the information model itself, it needs to change dramatically from what I'm familiar with, back in the day when, a channel partner would register a deal and then they would start sharing information with you, and basically not before that. And now you're talking about these other players being able to get rewarded for monetizing these moments that they influence in your direction. That's, to me, that's a totally different set of information flows to capture that value add. Is that right?
You're 100% correct. And we're seeing it play out. So I'll give 2 examples. I gave Microsoft early on. They became the most valuable company in the world. They outsold their direct competitor, AWS, 26 quarters in a row. If you dissect what they did with partnerships to do that, it's a very interesting story. One is that AWS got a 5-year head start in the hyperscaler world. This was a Jeff Bezos invention. So with a 5-year head start, AWS to this day has a better product portfolio than Microsoft. There's no better pricing that Microsoft has. They didn't come in as a low-cost provider. In terms of promotion, both Super Bowl ads were great. There's almost negligible promotional differences. All Microsoft had with their 470,000 current partners was place. If more of those 7 people said nice things about us, especially before the transaction, but at and during, after, we think that that's going to allow us to outgrow our competition. And the answer is yes. So what they did after that is they took their program dollars, which were all engineered towards the point of sale. If you sold a 365 license in Office, if you sold Teams or security, if you sold Dynamics, or you sold any part of Microsoft, here's your front end margin, here's your back end margin, here's your market development funds, your new customer bonuses, your spiffs. Like the world has always lived in that world.
Right.
Microsoft kind of lifted up all that money and said, what if we spread it out like peanut butter? What if we, spread over, some to the co-marketing, the early stages of co-selling? What if we spread some into that consulting design? So in all those moments, but they made a kind of an interesting decision, is that they took 2/3 of all that money. We're talking tens of billions of dollars. They put 2/3 of it post-sale. They banked on Wall Street understanding that stickiness, customer for life, is the metric in a subscription consumption model. And so by putting the money there, enriching every deal at 108% per year is what elevated them to the most valuable company. It wasn't just beating their competition. It was reprogramming how they go to market. I'll use a hardware example because the company you started with was a hardware company. Cisco just decided 60 days ago to do the same thing. Now, the first thing they did is hired a channel chief from Microsoft. But the second thing is they looked at Cisco, and here's a company over the last 10 years that hasn't grown in revenue. Chuck Robbins still has the $50 billion company that he took over from John Chambers, but it's a very different $50 billion company today. Only 45% of the company is that networking switch, router, firewall company that you would have recognized in the 80s and 90s. And now 55% of the company is recurring software. They're the third biggest cybersecurity company in the world with Splunk. But the problem was, if you look back 6 months ago, 98% of their channel incentives were now spread across only 45% of their business. And this happens to be the part of their business that Wall Street doesn't care a lot about. So if you want to double, triple, quadruple your stock price, which they've been able to do while not raising revenue, you got to go and move the money in this, what's called a point system. Start applying it at different parts of the cycle to help your marketing teams, to help your sales teams, to help your CX teams and your product teams across the entire life cycle. So if they can lift, 55% of their incentives dollars and spread it across the 55% of their business that's the most valued by investors, and shareholder value is the only thing in capitalism that companies are after, then you win. So this is this end of resale conversation of shoving all the money to the point of sale, especially when you're in a company that the point of sale is only the first 30 days with the customer. If you can spread it out, and it's now the number one thing the partners want from you as well. So the world kind of coalesced, 5 years into this decade of the ecosystem that we coined, that, the incentives are starting to overlay what partners want the most and what customers value the most. And we're taking the vendor from being the middle or the center of the universe.
Is there a good example that you're aware of that has solved this information flows problem? That is, how many people are touching this particular customer across their journey, which is, just as sort of a side note, seems like it's nonlinear as opposed to linear in the way that we used to think about it, at least. Whether it was or not is another story. But so who's cracked that puzzle of this information sharing that just really hasn't occurred in channel sales to the degree that seems like it's necessary now?
There is, and there's an emerging channel tech stack that over my shoulder, right at the top, I have a kind of a view of 261 entrepreneurial companies across 11 different islands of innovation to crack exactly that. In a non-linear world where you mentioned a deal registration, before the point of a deal registration, that could be at moment 14, 15, 16 out of 28.
Right.
It can't be too late by then.
Right.
So in the sales cycle, you'd love to get in moment one. When the customer has a problem, you start to see it at the beginning. So there are now 5 layers of technology alone that come before the deal registration, where partners and vendors can be sharing information out of their CRM and marketing automation systems, looking for matches. Hey, you read my ebook. Well, they listened to my podcast. Well, they went to my event. Well, they came to my website. Well, you just got 4 of the first 10 moments. Now you can decide if it's, one of our now majority millennial buyers millennials now make up over half of the tech industry in terms of buying. Maybe 75% of them don't want to talk to a human. That's a real number. Maybe for the next 18 moments, they want those to be digital. Even accumulating into a digital first or AI-led demo instead of a human-led demo. They're trying their hardest to stay away from the old sales pipeline. So in that, it might be an 18 digital moment that you're working with the partner or partners, and you're orchestrating the next 18 moments so the customer arrives at your solution. And your solution is going to be one of 7, by the way, is the average solution today in cloud, public cloud, SaaS, cybersecurity, and other places. So you're not the vendor. You're not the only person. So the company you mentioned, you kind of alluded to at the beginning, they're realizing now it may not be all about direct sales. It may not all be about channel sales. If we're going to be there with 7 people in terms of other parts of the solution and 7 partners, there's 14 different things going on in a non-linear world. How can we orchestrate that? How do we share data better? How do we attribute better? How do we use marketing platforms to, through, and with channel and partner marketing platforms better? That we're not relying on the deal reg, because by the time the deal reg hits, it might be too late.
Right, for sure.
So question, right? As I'm sitting here listening to this conversation and I'm thinking through who may be looking at this show down the road, and someone who is more on the enterprise side, right? Sitting there and going, yep, okay, you have the funding, you have the people to support it, you have the motions. What about organizations that are more on the small to mid-tier size, right? And how, as we're sitting here talking about what this all takes, what customers expect from a partner motion, how does someone who's on the smaller or mid-tier size kind of get their foot in the water with this, or start to build out a really good strategy without breaking the bank?
As a technology provider, you mean?
As a technology provider, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, the answer is simple. And I did a startup myself, and I raised $10 million and went through the whole fun of that. But the board is very clear that you have to grow your company direct. So there's no room for channels of distribution until 2 things happen. One is that you get product fit, and 2 is that you have a sales and marketing engine that's repeatable, reliable, and then at some point scalable. So every company, I'm going to say 10 years ago, started in that way. That until you can get your first couple $1 million and stay really intimate with those early customers, you never know what's going to happen to your product for a few years. It's where your early customers take you is normally where a product starts to go. But until you can figure out the sales and marketing, everything around it, there's no room for hiring a channel person, no room for calling resellers in those days until you get it going. If I flip out of the industry, if you watch the movie The Founder about McDonald's, the same thing. I mean, half the movie was literally about moving the fryolator by an inch and getting, the hamburger at 5 cents working properly. And then the second half of the movie was about franchising. If we're going to hit our market TAM for hamburgers, we're going to have to put a restaurant on every street corner in every town of the world. And so that was owning the real estate and everything else. But it's the same thing in technology. It was always this 2-part model that should we call on channel partners when we hit 2 million, 5 million, 10 million? When? Well, today it's completely different. You may never call channel partners. Because like I said, if you're an early stage company in SaaS, you may never need channels of distribution other than maybe a marketplace, but you definitely need partnerships. On the flip side, if you're a cybersecurity startup, there's 6,500 of those today, 6,500 cyber startups, you're going to absolutely require channels sooner than later because 91.6% of your TAM is sold through partners. So it really depends, what your startup or early stage company is in, when and how many, channel partners you need, if any. But now 100% of companies need partnerships out of the gate. And here's why. You built your company, if it's in software, you built it on probably AWS, Microsoft, or Google. You built alongside a buyer. So if you're going after a sales buyer, you're probably building in the Salesforce, Dynamics, HubSpot arrangement. If you're selling to a marketing buyer, you're one of the 14,106 startups in MarTech, you're building around Eloqua, Marketo, HubSpot, Pardot, and I could continue on for every buyer. But the fact of the matter is you're already in partnerships from day one. You're an alliance, you've got senior partnerships and platforms that you're already in, those marketplaces that you're going to have to get in. Those buyers hang around these big ecosystems. And so you're going to be drafting from a partnership perspective from day one. And it has to be in your business case today. And there's no, seed level VC that's going to talk to you unless you have partnering, kind of littered all the way through your pitch deck. Because they understand now that when you're part of the 7 layers of a solution, when you're a startup, you might be in layer 6 or layer 7 of that solution. Layer 1 is going to be one of the hyperscalers or one of the big SaaS platforms. And they understand that if you're not playing friendly in the 5 or 6 other alliances that you have, tech alliances, and the number one criteria of that new buyer, I mentioned a majority millennial buyer, their number one criteria is integrations. So if you don't work well in their environment, they'll buy a product 80% as good as the next one if it works better in their environment. So again, you're coming out of the gate with a pretty hefty partnership strategy across your go-to-market, across your product. And to be successful, in today's world, there's no other way that you're going to be able to do it.
So when we think about going to market with partners, there's a lot that plays into that. Not only the marketing strategy for going out and talking to the customers in the right way, but it's also attracting the right partners, right? Getting them to want to align with you and sell with you and support you. How has that changed with how quickly everything is evolving? And there's a follow-up to this because we had a great question come through, which I'll bring up here on the screen, but I want to kind of dovetail that with the question I just asked. Christy is talking about the onboarding and supporting, right? How has that changed? Because the whole thing has changed with how you get someone interested in you and then how you most importantly onboard and support them, because that's a make or break a point, right? I mean, that's critical.
Yeah, it is. So I'll answer your first question, then I'll get to Christy's question. So let's get obsessed for a second over the 28 moments. 28 moments is buyer psychology, behavior. It has nothing to do with the tech industry. It has to do with considered purchases. The average buyer, when they buy a car, go through 28 moments. Some people spend 50 moments. Some people spend 1. They just drive to the dealership and buy whatever Larry, recommends. The fact of the matter is the average buyer now spends 28 moments. And we're starting to learn in every product category what those moments look like. The buyer's trying to get smarter. The buyer's trying to avoid humans, during this cycle. And when you get to the car dealership in the upper right, after 28 moments, you've already configured, priced the car. You're smarter about the car, technically, than anyone at the dealership. You know about the deal because you downloaded the invoice price and the back-end rebates. You kind of know whether to buy in March or April. You're so smart that the whole 8 hours you spend at the dealership is kind of a royal waste of time. And you get, kind of disrespected as they go back and forth with trying to get you the deal. You already know 5,000 people who have bought this exact car within 50 miles of you. And there's a bell curve right in front of you where you see the best deal and the worst deal, but you kind of know at the top of the bell curve, right to the penny, what you're probably going to spend in an average deal. So with all that being said, most buyers are like, I'd rather avoid that whole thing, avoid the humans, and just Carvana the car to my driveway, hand me the keys, and maybe I'll even pay you $100 more just to avoid that disastrous, experience. Now come back into tech for a minute. A lot of buyers are saying the same thing. When I get into somebody's pipeline and I have some hungry inbound rep calling me every 4 hours to get a status update on the deal because their manager is all over them. I mean, I want to avoid that. I want to get to the point where I'm smarter than anyone at the company, that I know the 7 layers. I know how to pull it all to myself together. Getting obsessed over the 28 moments means this for a startup. There's a high likelihood that you're going to miss all 28 moments in almost every single customer in your TAM. It's going to be owned by others. They win the Google search, which happens 81% of the time. They win the ChatGPT and other research that your customers do. And they win the ebook and the podcast. They win the event. They win the YouTube video, whatever it is to get them through. But they definitely win the consulting gig and the design work. So in the best case scenario, you might lose 24 out of the 28 moments. You might only see 4 of them in the best case scenario. In the worst case scenario, you see none of them and you lose a deal without ever knowing there was a deal. In a world, whether you're the biggest company that you started off with, or you're just a little startup, I'm getting obsessive over these 28 moments. And if I can better get to, this gets to Christy's question, if I can get to the people that are earning these moments and share data with them, how am I going to find them? How am I going to onboard them? How am I going to support them with a program to make them a better version of themselves? They might be a consultant. They could be an alliance of some type. They could be an affiliate, an affinity partner, all kinds of partner types that we may not have considered in the pre-channel world as being really important in these first 28 moments. The answer is actually over my shoulder again. I kind of chose the 3 best posters to have behind me today. But there are spheres of influence around your customer. Remember, everything starts with the customer. If you ask all of your customers in your TAM, your target addressable market, what do you read? What do you listen to? Where do you go? And who do you follow? 3 pretty simple questions. Like in March of 23, we all had to get smart about Gen AI really quickly because our neighbors and friends started asking if we lit up Skynet. In that 30 days around that time where we all had to form an opinion whether Arnold Schwarzenegger was coming back or not, the fact of the matter is all of us went to a very narrow set of influence. When I looked at the broader channel, we're talking tens of millions of people. There is only 106 magazines in the world. There's only 121 leading podcasts like this one. There is only 352 events. When you're thinking about tens of millions of people, you would think that the numbers would be much larger, but they aren't. There's only about 1,000 watering holes where tens of millions of people learned about Gen AI in 30 days. So how do I go and recruit? How do I go and onboard these partners? They hang around these different elements. Depending on my customer buyer type, if I'm selling to IT or I'm selling to the CISO, I'm selling to the head of marketing, who spends more than the CIO in many mid-sized companies. If I'm selling into an industry, 297 industries, I'm selling into geography, 193 different countries or states or provinces. If I'm selling into different segments, SMB itself has 6 subsegments to it: mid-market, large enterprise, government. If I'm selling into product type, so I have a very product-specific set. G2 Crowd has 2,262 categories of software alone. If I'm selling into business models around managed services, subscription, micro-consumption, etc., I just gave you a lot of permutations about where partners land around your customer, and they ought to be partners of yours. Because if you could get 2 or 3 of them saying nice things about you before, during, and after the transaction, that's how you go to market today. It's a surround strategy. It's nothing linear.
It's what you're describing is sort of a B2B version of word of mouth. Like these are now entities talking about you in a positive way, as opposed to just individuals. Obviously, it's individuals within these companies primarily, but they could be producing content that is the corporate instantiation of one of those conversations. That
and they're also not new. These are not new people. So for example, digital agencies, marketing agencies have hung around the buyer for over 60, 70 years now, since the Mad Men days. They've earned the right, that trusted spot. They've earned it over the course of decades. They built that company's website. They got them on page 1 of Google. Like they've done so much for them. But as technology's kind of taken over MarTech and AdTech, 78% of digital agencies are now tech services companies. They've got one of those seats around the table in front of your buyer, and it took them 30 or 40 years to earn that, generations to earn that. So when they write something in an ebook, or they consult, or they recommend something, or say something nice about you, this isn't just somebody out on the internet saying nice things. This is literally somebody that, to that customer, their kids may play on the same soccer team. They may vacation together at their, cottages that are together up by the lake. I mean, there's a history there that no inside sales rep is going to jump into and jump over and get the customer to not listen to that person.
Right.
Surrounding the customer today is pretty much the only way you get to market in medium, mid-market through large enterprise. Commodity, see a bear, shoot a bear deals are still available in small and medium business up to about 250 employees. But if you're trying to sell upwards into medium and larger companies, Surround is basically the only way that you can create a go-to-market today and be successful.
I am so sad because we are completely out of time, and there are so many other questions that I wanted to ask. We didn't even touch on the idea with the marketplaces and the AI, Pete, that you and I were going back and forth with and bantering.
No, we need a part two. We need a part two.
I was just going to say, Jay, we might need to bring you back for a part two on this, because there's a lot more I want to dive into. Thank you so much for sharing the insights. And, as I said in one of my posts when I was promoting this, if you're not following Jay for some of these insights, I mean, you issue multiple times daily some excellent insights that I definitely have used in a lot of my discussions. So do yourself a favor and hit that follow button. But you have survived the hot seat, and we're going to bring you back, Jay, for a part two. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those watching, if you have what it takes to be in the hot seat, let us know. If you have an idea, we would love to talk with you. That's it for today's episode. I am Jody Spencer.
And I'm Pete Smith. Tune in next time for different faces, different topics, different perspectives as we put somebody different into the hot seat. Thanks.
Have a great day, everyone.